So, Marshall, we're connecting today because you've had a long life of some struggle and dipping into the criminal justice system and also struggling with substance use and now being in recovery. And I'm really interested, and I think a lot of people are probably really interested to learn both about kind of what led you into making some of the choices that you did, and then also what has helped you to kind of come into a different space of more of transformation in your life, and to learn about the things that were useful to you, the things that weren't, um, and yeah, your hopes for your future. So, um, would you share with me just a little snippet about how you would describe your growing up?
Yeah, definitely. And being educated in psychology, I understand the thought processes. Uh, so I grew up on the North Shore. Um, grew up in Hamilton, Mass, but we were very poor. My father and mother moved to a place called Asbury Grove in Hamilton. It was like a Christian campground place. Bought a really cheap, broken down house out there, and my sister was born a couple years later after me, and my mother and father had a tumultuous relationship. My mother was in and out with alcoholism. My father was diagnosed at 18 with a bipolar disorder. And he would experience severe manic episodes, not so much the lows, but the highs. When I was 7 years old, this way the story is told is my mother and father were having issues. My father had stopped taking his lithium because he had a lawyer that was helping him with his business, and also had manic depressive illness, and convinced my father it was a good idea to stop taking those meds. And he started having some manic episodes, and the decision was that my father and mother get divorced. So my father was out of the house. My mother kept my sister and I in the house, and my father would visit on Wednesdays, and every other weekend we'd spend with my father. And he got married shortly after the divorce to another woman that lived in Beverly. So she had a couple of older sons, older than my sister and I, about like 5 or 6 years. And so it was a broken home at 7. And my mother struggled with being a single mother, having to raise 2 kids, which I feel like it was a responsibility she didn't really want. She wasn't interested in that. And she began drinking heavily, going out to bars, bringing men, dating these men that she'd meet, and my mother and these men were alcoholic, and it caused a lot of problems in the household for my sister and for myself. My mother struggled with trauma from abuse being a child in her family, and a lot of that, got remanifested onto me. And it was a struggle. And I was a softer kid, and like she came from like the old kind of upbringing. We were old. My ancestors were German settlers, so it's like you got to be tough. And so she was very hard on me. And I struggled in school, diagnosed with ADHD, designated to the SPED class, special education room, misbehave. And I think a lot of that was from the trauma of having separated parents and dealing with a tough home life, but also probably genetically from my father. And growing up a poor kid in a rich town isn't easy either. So I think like a lot of my acting out had to do with me trying to connect with others, trying to impress people, make friends. It was always a struggle for me. I was overweight, and being diagnosed with ADHD, it was like an experiment of what medication is going to work, and they struggled to prescribe. Eventually, I landed on Adderall, which is just straight amphetamine, and the drug worked well, helped me focus. And I think I was like 9 years old, but it wasn't long before I began abusing that drug. And I remember as a kid I used to hang out with. His brother taught him how to sniff pills, so he taught me how to sniff them. So we started sniffing them, and that's where my drug use began. And, obviously, like, I hung out with a bunch of other disadvantaged kids. It wasn't many of us, but formed a little kind of crew, and we would steal cigarettes, we would drink, and, like, that's where the behavior, like, really began.
Yeah.
We're outcasts,
Yeah.
and people will say, like, they reminisce about their childhood. I hated my childhood.
Right.
And, it was a struggle. It was a struggle being at home. And that was where I, like, really began to kind of disconnect from my family life. I'd spend a lot of time at, like, friends' houses. My friends' parents would have to kick me out of the house to send me home.
Right.
Yeah, so uh, when I got introduced to marijuana, I was kind of resistant to it at first because my mother was very strict on drugs. Like, no, don't do drugs, don't do drugs. And but eventually, because all my friends were doing it, I decided to try it out, and I really liked the drug because it gave me a good feeling. It helped me get outside myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that became a big thing for me. And my mother also got me starting working when I was like 12 years old, because that was instilled in her, coming from that kind of German farmer background, is like, you got to work.
Mm-hmm.
You got to work. And considering, like, I was labeled as stupid, the thought was like, he's got to work or he ain't going to survive. So
Mm-hmm.
I started landscaping at a young age. And then when I started making money, my father smoked marijuana. I'd steal marijuana from him, but I also started buying marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found is I could connect better with people when I had something to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So I just began selling it. And it helped me, build popularity with friends. When it came to, like, chasing after girls, it was something I could use to get girls to like me.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the other kids were skinnier, I was always fatter. So, I was really insecure.
It's something that you say, it just makes so much sense. We think about these different circles of influence that we have, right? We have our own individual self, our biology, but then we also have our family and our school and our community and our peers. And then these other wider circles, our culture and our, um, atmospheres that we sort of grow up in and around. And these are the things that impact people. And I hear you saying very, very clearly, my childhood was impacted by my biology, my family, and a lot of my peers too, and the education system that you were in, and um, I it resonates a lot to hear how, sometimes people think about people selling drugs as um, somebody who has kind of like a nefarious desire to cause harm to other people, but also a lot of the times it's actually more about connection and about feeling needed and important. And I hear that coming out really clearly in your story.
Yeah, desperation is survival, right? It's a way to get what you want when you can't get it somewhere else. And like, that's the biopsychosocial model. And who was it that wrote the book about, like, peer influence recently? It was a woman. She was real popular. I can't remember the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so not getting the support I needed from my family dynamic, I started looking elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't get it from, obviously the authoritative structure within the school system or the town. So I was only left with one place to find it. So, like, that's the outcast. That's where you be, and then so you don't want to fall into the rules of those two different
spaces that have kind of been rejecting you. Yeah. So how did you find yourself first interacting with the justice system?
So, like, it started, like, me and my mother came to a head when I was like 13 because I was partying, drinking, misbehaving, getting in trouble, and she ended up kicking me out. I ended up living with my father and my stepmother. I stole some alcohol from my stepmother. She flipped out. It was very demeaning. She didn't want me in the house. So I left, and then I was staying with a friend of mine and his mother. And so I was kind of homeless at that time. I was like 14 at the time. And then there was threats. that point of like, yeah, DYS, we're gonna put you in social services. But there was communications between other family members, but my communication was like, yeah, go ahead, and I'm gonna start making reports about you, about your bad parenting. Like, what's up, you know? And so I kind of hid out for a year, you know, in that environment, which was good for me because I like my friend's mother was like very like she was like very caring. We had a solid relationship, so I connected with her, and like that was something I'd been looking for. So that made me feel good. Then my father had a mental breakdown because the relationship between him and my stepmother was kind of breaking up. He had to go to a mental hospital. I saw him there, highly medicated. My friend's mother took me to see him. That was tough. He got released a few weeks later, and he was on his own. And the way my father is he doesn't like being alone. So he reached out to me and was like, "I'm sorry. I'd like you to come live with me." So I ended up moving back with my father in Danvers. He got an apartment, and so like my father's not a disciplinarian. He pretty much was like, "Son, this is our bachelor pad. I'm gonna let you learn your own life lessons." So I'm already like, you know what I mean, already selling drugs and really kind of connected with this the kind of younger kids who were getting in trouble in the streets and things. So it's like the behavior just kind of like it expanded.
Kind of was unchecked.
It was unchecked, yeah. So I started selling drugs more, drinking heavier, partying out all hours of the night. School was just a social setting for me to network, and like life was a party for me. So I started getting drunk and disorderlies. I got popped for marijuana and mushrooms once. They put me on probation. You know, I got admitted to some psych hospitals because of hallucinogen-induced psychoses. LSD. I was messing around with that. Ecstasy was big back then. We're going to raves. That was like the rave time. So like that was that period of experimentation. So my education just like went to nothing. I dropped out of high school my senior year, and luckily my father convinced me to get my GED, which I did, and I passed that. And that was when I really started having contact with the law. But I was able to, when I was like 18, 19, I was able to pull my life back together, which was weird. And I think it came about from a depression of sitting on my couch all day selling people bags of marijuana. It was like kind of like a nowhere life. So at that point, I ended up meeting a girl. She came from a good family, a Greek girl, and we were dating. I started working on fishing boats. Like I realized I'm gonna have a career or a job. Like, so, I like the ocean. I started working on fishing boats, and like the first boat I worked on was like a complete mess. It was like a scow,
I don't know what a scow is.
A scow it was a 100-year-old Eastern rig, which means that the wheelhouse is in the back. It's all wood, all old white oak, and they were fishing for eels. It was a couple of Irish guys, from Ireland, and but I started. Believe it or not, we were making money, so like it was cool. Like I had a job, I'm making money. I cut back on my illegal behaviors, focusing on this relationship, and when I was 20 years old, I was out on a fishing trip. And I'm coming back in from the fishing trip, and the Coast Guard called in to say a family member died. And I remember thinking it was like my grandfather or something. I was like, well, let's just keep fishing, guys. I didn't want him to lose money. When we came in, I asked my girlfriend, I said, who in my family died? She's like, I don't want to tell you. And I said, well, you got to tell me because I'm going to find out anyway. And she's like, your sister died.
My goodness.
My sister was 18 years old. She was in Florida. She had a boyfriend down there, and she had taken a bunch of pills and was drinking. She went into a coma when she fell asleep that night and never woke up. So that was like devastating for me because me and my sister were really close. Like we went through a lot of shit, and I didn't know how to deal with it. So after that point, I started drinking heavily. I started going to bars. I was that age, and I got introduced to 2 drugs. At that point, I got introduced to cocaine, which wasn't a drug I personally liked to do. It didn't make me feel good, give me anxiety, but everybody was, doing coke and going to the bathrooms and stuff. and then people started asking me if I could get it. And I asked a couple of my marijuana dealers, like, if they could get it. They were like, yeah, no problem. So I started selling that, and so started making a lot of cash doing that. And I got introduced to pharmaceutical opiates. Now, I had done them before, but I never was like too interested in them. But a buddy of mine used to get big old jugs of Vicodins, 10 milligrams, and he would trade me Vicodins for Coke. And I started eating the Vicodins, and I just, for some reason, I really just fell in love with that drug, the way it made me feel. It's a painkiller, you know, it gave me confidence, made me feel invincible, and that's where my opioid addiction began to spiral out of control. So that just became like a race. From the age of 21 to 26, I eventually got addicted to the Oxycontins, which are really expensive. So I'm hustling cocaine so I can feed my opioid addiction. And like, we didn't know what addiction was back then. Like, we didn't talk about it. Like, we weren't addicted. You know what I mean? Like, if anything, we might have called it a habit. You know. And it just got really expensive, became a lifestyle, and you know, the higher my tolerance got, the more money I had to make to supply my habits. So eventually I transitioned to using heroin because the pharmaceutical company started putting gelatin inside the Oxycontins. So it was a time release. And I remember when I started getting those, I couldn't get the drug in my body. I could eat 10 of those things and I still wouldn't get the feeling, and I'd get sick. And I was at my buddy's wedding, and his cousin, we were in the bathroom, you know, everyone was doing lines. He was like, do a line of this. I was like, what is it? He's like, it's heroin. I was like, I promised myself I'm never going to do heroin. And besides a possession of marijuana charge between the age of 21 and 26, I hadn't gotten in really any trouble. And he was like, yeah, he's like, wait, you know, I can tell you, he could see I was sick. Like, I was really starting to get sick. And he was like, this will make you feel better. So I did it. And I remember doing heroin. I was like, I wish I had done this sooner, you know. And so I became a full-blown heroin addict at that point. And you know, and then like my thinking started getting like a little bit more grandiose. You know, like obviously it probably caused some psychological issues. And then I kept planning on like selling more and more drugs.
Well, and you were also at an age when a lot of people, you know, in that sort of mid-range of the 20s is where some people might begin to have some of those biological genetic things come out for them, you know, around mental health and you know, challenges that might not have emerged before sometimes do come out in that time period of development.
Yeah, and then you dump a whole bunch of drugs on top of it.
and the invincibility that comes with those drugs, and it's a recipe for a huge set of challenges. Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. And so then I began selling more Coke, and like I made a connection through a fisherman buddy. We were bringing Coke in over from California through his connection, and like I thought like this was great, and I was gonna, you know, be financially stable, and you know, it didn't turn into meth, and like things just kept spiraling out of control. And I was working with a girl I'd grown up with. I've known her since I was 14, and we ended up, you know, she got an investigation on her, and then it, you know, rolled over onto me, and then next thing you know, we both got busted with meth and heroin, and it was a federal case. And so she was sentenced to 3.5, and I was sentenced to 12.5 years. And I'd only done 20 days in Middleton County before that. So like that was like kind of like that eye-opening moment. Like, and I had always thought it's just drugs, but the feds don't look at it like that. They look at it like, hey, minimum mandatories, like this is, doesn't matter what you do or say, like you're getting at least 10 years. So yeah, I was sentenced to 12.5 years in federal prison for those crimes.
What, tell me a little bit, if you would, about your arrival in prison, and what that kind of adjustment was like for you, having lived on the outside and then being kind of having your whole life really sort of flipped upside down for you.
Oh, it was awful. And like, whereas I thought I was like someone on the street, like I was wicked out of shape. Um, I was super overweight, and like the guys in there were just like a lot more cunning and in better physical condition than me. So it's like I was like a nobody, and I just really kept to myself. I began reading a lot. I got big into religion. I was like looking for like the salvation, like get me out of this, get me out. Like this is I don't want this. I remember I ended up getting bond, but I remember it was like 5 months in holding over at Plymouth, and I used to look at the clock all the time, like at night, like just praying that I get bond. I get bond. I go live with my aunt and uncle. It was a third-party custodial, and then I didn't want to face the time, so I ended up absconding. I was hiding out in California, and then I think, I got popped again. Probably somebody mentioned that I was, who I was. They had to ship me all the way back out, and then I ended up having to plead guilty. I was in Wyatt, which is a federal holding down in Rhode Island. I was there for like just under 2 years waiting to get sentenced. My co-defendant got sentenced. I read extensively there. They had a little education program. I made good friends with the woman that ran it. I work in the library, so like my reading, having like something like ADHD. I don't even want to call it a disorder. It's just like this constant craving for stimulus. And if you're not feeding it, it like turns itself inside, and which is a very difficult thing to deal with. So like to provide stimulus, I read books. And so that's what I did like while I was in prison. I just read extensively. First fiction, then I was like, I'm not learning nothing. And I read nonfiction. Anything that was, fascinated me. So science, philosophy, religion. I got big into psychology, self-help, and I think that's where like the process began. I started realizing that like I could take steps to improve myself, improve my life. And then it just helped me connect to others better because I could understand myself better, understand other people better. I was always really inquisitive, and like that's where kind of like my growth began, was in prison. The prison wasn't offering it. It's not like they had like anything like spectacular for me, but having that time, the time to sit and read and be introspective was that opportunity for me to change my mind. And then I got sentenced. I remember when I went to the medium security prison in Otisville in the feds after sentencing, and they put me on a unit of 150 guys. And they're tears, like it's frightening, like you don't want to be there, it's awful. And like there was probably about like 90 guys on the floor when I arrived, and other guys might have, some work and stuff in the prison, and I was a minority. So there was probably about like maybe 6 or 7 white guys, and then out of 90 guys, the rest of them were black and Spanish. And I remember like hyper focusing on one man, black man, and his arms were massive, bigger than my legs. He was a huge man. So I was scared, thinking like, oh man, immediately my mind goes to that like survival street. Like I'm gonna have to fight. Like one of these dudes is gonna test me. I'm not, and so immediately like I'm paranoid. I'm like, all right, so like if somebody challenges me, I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna end up. So I was frightened.
And I think that's probably an experience that so many people describe, of being in a space where maybe in your home community you were a big fish in a small pond, right? And then you find yourself incarcerated, and immediately there is no safety around you. You absolutely have that kind of nervous system reaction that's going to say, I'm going to have to resort to the tool of violence in order to survive this situation, or at least that might be one of the first things that comes through somebody's mind.
Yeah, because as soon as someone punks you off, you know what I mean, then everyone's going to do it. So you got to stand up for yourself. So anyways, I'll tell you the story. they put me in my cell, and I was going down there, and then I saw this man walking towards me, and I got scared, and then he reached his hand out. He's like, "Hey, my name's Donald."
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "Hey, how you doing? My name's Marshall." He's like, "Nice to meet you." And he just became one of many friends. And what I found out is, in prison, there was just a high level of consideration and respect. Like violence and things like isn't going to happen unless you're looking for it. Like if you're gambling or if you're trying to control things. Like they had chairs. Like everyone put their chair out there. I'd see guys fight over a spot on the floor, like a chair. That's my chair spot. You know what I mean? But if you just minded your own business and was respectful, people, they wouldn't bother you, because I just think human beings naturally don't want to have conflict. Like that's what I started learning. So once I learned that, I was able to relax. I got big into like lifting weights, and I ended up getting a job as a GED tutor. So I worked with guys to get their GEDs. Like that was cool. And I had a mentor. This one guy. He was like a notorious kind of like gangster type dude. And I remember, so I'm in there. I got a 12.5-year sentence, and like we're working in education, and he was in there with one of his other cronies, and he was talking to me, and he was like, "Well, ask me questions. What do you think about your sentence?" And I was complaining, obviously, like, like, "Oh, I think it's crazy. Give me 12.5 years for drugs and all this." And then when it was all said and done, he looked at me and he said, "Well," because he had a 38-year sentence. He's like, "Well, I'd suggest not saying that to anyone else, because there's guys in here that would kill for your sentence." And I was like, that affected me, and I was offended at first, but then when I thought about it, like it really sank in, and like I started to have more like understanding and appreciation for what guys go through. And it was like, I would meet these guys, like like a lot of these black guys and Spanish guys coming out of like impoverished, neighborhoods, that were doing like 30 years, for like 3 bags of crack or something, and I was like, and I watched the whole crack law thing where they had to change the law because it was racially biased, and at the end of the day, after these guys have been serving 20 years or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, hey, yeah, we were racist, sorry about that." So like I saw like from the inside out, like what society does to people unfairly. And, like it was an eye opener. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. It's as much an opportunity that you could seize as much as a tremendous period of suffering that could come upon you, And it sounds like a lot of the things that maybe you would have benefited from when you were younger, focused time to sort of spend learning about yourself and getting to know yourself and building a sense of inner confidence about yourself. Those things weren't possible in the environment that you were growing up in for whatever reasons, right? But somehow you built an environment on the inside to kind of create those opportunities and then seize them for yourself while you were serving time.
Yeah, there was an old cat burglar I did time with, and I really loved this guy. And he used to always say to me that in every adversity is the seed of equal or greater benefit. And you're absolutely right. And then, it's like either, what do they say, you grab the bull by the tail or the horns? It just became a matter of grabbing the bull by the horns, and there's all these sayings like, Don King, he served a lengthy sentence, and he says, "I didn't serve time, time served me." So you read all these things, you start learning, how to make the best out of a bad situation. And I think that's where a lot of the strength and power comes from, people that have experienced our current, prison systems, incarceration systems. And the sad thing is they might not see the power that they have, or the benefit and how they can contribute to society, because they get left out. They feel left out. They don't feel. And
And even as you don't have, we all come to the table with different tools, and some of those tools we came by naturally, some of those tools came by us, some of those tools we have the opportunity to grab onto as they come by, but you were able to use a lot of the tools that you had and that you built and that came across you. What was it like for you when you were released, and what has the transition back into this world outside of incarceration been like for you?
so luckily, I had like some good, solid family members, aunt and uncle. My mother supported me. Our relationship strengthened through that experience, and you know, I got released into the halfway house like everybody. They make you fill out like these itineraries all day, and like they won't even give you a smartphone. So I had like a flip phone, and I had to set alarms. I call all the time. They expect you to get a job, so like it was just like it was a fight and a hustle. Like I had to get a job, so my aunt hooked me up with a job out where she lives, out in Hopkinton area. And then I was fighting with a halfway house, like put me on home confinement because my job's out here, waking up at 4 a.m., riding my bike, doing the train station thing, riding to get my food stamps. Couldn't tell the halfway house I had food stamps because they didn't allow you to have food stamps. Trying to get mass health, so it was just kind of like trying to find my way. I started working. I couldn't get a job, so I got a job through a temp agency. I don't know how I would have done it if I didn't have family support, and like that's why I really, really feel for guys that are coming back out into society, because the deck is stacked against them. It depends. It's hit or miss. Like there's a lot of good resources out there, but if you don't get connected to the right resources, you're pretty much just left to fend for yourself and survive. But yeah, I did that.
That's one of the most important pieces of research that people have done, is that when family connections are able to be repaired, when people are able to stay connected to their families, that can be the difference between being released and then reoffending and coming back into the system, and being released and successfully reentering the community. Both that and occupation opportunities are some of the most important resources that people need in order to be able to kind of turn that leaf and make a new start for themselves. So it makes sense that how you describe it, that connection with your family, your extended family, and the fact that the two of you, or that you all were able to work on your relationship over time, heal wounds probably on both sides that were created, right? And rely on them. Know that they were there, that they were waiting for you when you came out, and that they were going to be there for you, is so huge when it comes to making it once you leave.
It is, and if somebody that's been through the system, especially if someone's in the street, was hustling to survive and got in trouble for it, and they get back out and they can't find the opportunities they need to meet their basic needs, their basic human needs. And I'll tell you this because it's how we used to talk back in the day. When people pick up drugs, they call it work. Like they'll ask the dealer, man, I need work. Give me some work. So just think about that. Like that's.
Yeah.
So like if you force people in and they don't have proper opportunities, they're going to be forced back into that whole cycle.
Yeah.
And like that's what we do now today, is like we try to pull people out of that cycle and be able to connect them to whatever resources or opportunities they need, but also give them that kind of emotional support that they need to work through the challenges as well.
How did you manage to stay sober?
Oh, so like the sobriety thing, that's right, you mentioned that. So when I was in the low security I was in Danbury, I started getting back into my old ways. I was selling cigarettes, grandiose ideas of like, I'm going to make money and save money so I got money when I get home. And, I started smoking weed again. Got involved with smoking K2. I was, back on my shit, right? And I hadn't gotten to that point where I made that mental change. And I'd been through the programs, and I was in school. I was studying for my psych degree. And there was like a lot of I got scared that like I'd get in trouble again. And I just started studying Buddhism. And the 5th precept is I endeavor to abstain from intoxicants. Now, nobody had ever really given me like a real good definition or reason of why like you shouldn't use intoxicants, because like that was like the thing that like that's like a childhood connection, right? Like that's what made me feel good. So like trying to live my life without having that relationship with substances was hard for me to come to terms with. But then when I started reading about it in Buddhism and trying to like forge out a spiritual path, like the explanation was pretty simple. Intoxicants pollutes your mind, pollutes your karma, so that you are unable to develop your mind and follow a spiritual path. So like that resonated with me so much, and because of that fear of getting in trouble again, especially when my family was helping me, I finally just, I got out of that situation, and I finally was like, you know what, like I can do this. I can, because I'd done it in prison, you know what I mean? So I was like, you know what, I can do this. And I finally made that commitment to stop, because that was over eight years ago. So I've been clean and sober ever since. And then but that really wasn't like what recovery is today out here in society. So I came back into society and had to see where I fit in.
Right.
And so my recovery in society was a struggle, because I'm used to a nightlife. I'm used to, being able to have fun and connect with people. And, recovery in society was like, all right, sit down and shut up over here. And, if you, and like, I'm like obviously single. So it's like, I'm scared to death to talk to girls, because I'm like, oh, they'll think I'm a creep. And it was just really uncomfortable for me. So, like having to learn how to like navigate this whole kind of recovery landscape just became like always like a big networking thing for me, like network and see what's available. And like being a founder of a nonprofit was kind of like through that synthesis of seeing what's out there and what's not, and saying like, all right, well, we can improve on this. Because when you stop using substances, it's like you lose a whole portion of your life. A bunch of people, you lose a kind of like a bunch of activities.
Right.
And it can be difficult, especially if you're not able to develop a community. So like that's kind of where that came from. But now today I've networked out enough. I work in health and recovery, so it's become a lifestyle for me, and now I'm enveloped. But it was not an easy process. It was very difficult, and there was a lot of bumps along the way.
When you think about the resources inside of you internally and the supports externally, as you kind of look back over your life to this point, right? What would you say are the the 2 most important resources internally and the 2 most important resources externally that you have needed, and in order to get to this place of working every day and being and experiencing success in your recovery?
Internally, it's my spirituality. Like I've memorized like the principles of Buddhism. It's a path I follow, so it's like it keeps me from deviating. I stay focused on that. And then the one thing, like you said, one thing externally.
A couple of things, if you want. Yeah.
The 2 things externally, I would say, was the foundation. My family was number one, because they were there while I was away, and they're there now, and I know they're always going to be there. And then after that's friends. But the other thing externally is, and it's bothering me right now, is this right here. Because this didn't exist before I went in. and I had to learn how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do everything on this. I do my job. I connect to people. I run my nonprofit. You know, it's just everything. Like
Having knowledge and skills and access to your technology.
I have a computer in my pocket.
Yeah.
So this was like mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, this is how I connect to the recovery world. This is how so I would say this right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because, um, we call it digital equity, right? Like people need to be able to have access to the means to remain connected through the internet or to the means to have um, reliable electronic devices that allow them to do their job, to train for their work, to stay connected to family, to accomplish the adulting tasks that we need to accomplish, like paying bills and all of those things. And when people don't have that access, it can really be a barrier to success for sure.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest struggles too because in the support group that we have, we got guys that have been down for like decades and decades and decades, and they don't know how to use the phones, and it's a real struggle for them, and they get real frustrated.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I get it.
Yeah. As you look to your future, what is the thing you feel most hopeful about?
The thing I feel most hopeful about in my future is just acceptance. So like as I've developed in business, I think one person had a little hateration going on, and she was talking about like I helped develop a business for a girl I was dating and a nonprofit, and her thing was like, well, what if businesses fail? What if they fail? And then I was like, well, yeah, you're right, that does happen. But I was thinking about it, and I was like, I don't care if I fail. You know, like what do I got to lose? Like there's nothing to gain or lose. I do what I do because I'm deeply internally motivated.
Mm-hmm.
If I fail, I fail. If I succeed, I succeed. Like it's the feeling is the same on both lines. And then I realized that it was her fear manifesting on me.
Mm-hmm.
And so just confidence and acceptance that I can live my life peacefully. I can be at peace. I live at peace in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at peace out here in the world. I'm not really concerned with what the outcomes are as long as I do my best. You know, that's it.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing your lessons